Yeah, good morning to you. It is 9 o'clock on Monday, May the 11th, and it is Call Keir, Sir Keir Starmer, newly elected leader of the Labour Party, who joins me now. Thank you for coming along to answer these questions. Sir Keir, before we put you over to the first of the questions, you've been less than enthusiastic or less than impressed from what you heard from the Prime Minister last night. Obviously, you'll have the opportunity to listen in greater detail later today. What specifically exercises you over what we heard last night, Sir Keir? And morning to you.
Well, what I think everybody wanted to hear was something that was pretty clear, and a sense of all the countries, England, Wales, Scotland, pulling together. And we didn't get clarity. And I accept that for some of the things like when can a school open, that's going to be conditional. But on this business of going back to work, the suggestion was last night that people go back to work today if they can't work at home, but don't use public transport. Now, it's really difficult, particularly in a city like London. And without guidelines in place as to how workplaces need to operate. Simple things. How do you keep people 2 metres apart? What about sanitation, protective equipment? These were things which were discussed in a consultation document last weekend, but not resolved yet. So I was actually quite surprised. The Prime Minister said, effectively, in 12 hours' time, start going back to work without those bits in place. And we needed that clarity. And it's unravelling a bit this morning because I think the Foreign Secretary has now said, well, go back to work doesn't really mean till Wednesday. So suddenly it's shifted. And what I wanted to see was this detail pinned down, because this is a difficult exercise. I accept that, and any government would struggle. But you almost need more clarity coming to this stage. Lockdown is clear, it's pretty straightforward, stay at home. Coming out, you need real clarity, and it's a bit all over the place.
And unions are very concerned about the well-being, possibly even the lives, of some of the people who are on the front line. Is that a valid fear, or are they politicking a little bit, Sir Keir?
No, it's a valid fear. What happened last Sunday was the government put some draft guidelines out about how you do keep people 2 metres apart, etc. And the unions engaged in that consultation, but they haven't seen the outcome. So they put in their proposals about how workplaces should be. I would have liked to see that in place, because I would have thought the Prime Minister would be in a stronger position to say, well, here we are, the trade unions are signed up, businesses are signed up, here's your guidelines, everybody, let's make them operate. Instead of that, nobody's seen the guidelines yet. And this is the problem. Go back to work, where the guidelines, they're not ready yet. There's a sense of the Prime Minister sort of feeling that because he said he'd say something on Sunday, he's had to say something, but all the bits aren't in place yet.
Let's get to the calls. That's what Call Keir is all about. Kelly is in Kingston. You're through to Sir Keir Starmer. Go ahead, Kelly. Good morning to you.
Yes, I wonder what you'll be asking Boris Johnson in Parliament today after hopefully seeing the 50-page strategy that he's going to be putting out there. The general public are not going to trust the government when everything is done so far has been such a shambles. So many people have died and still many do so. What are you likely going to be asking the PM today, and what do you know about stay alert means? I can't see a clear exit strategy.
Stay on the line, Kelly. Sir Keir.
Kelly, thanks very much for that. I mean, I'm going to read, we're expecting this 50-page document from the government before the Prime Minister makes his statement, so obviously I'll read that. What I want to ask him are questions that you and others would want him to answer. In other words, I think most people this morning will be scratching their head and saying, if I'm one of those people who can't work at home, am I supposed to go back today or Wednesday? Am I supposed to wear a mask if I go onto a bus or a tube? What am I supposed to do if it's not safe when I get to work? So what I'm going to try and do is, rather than sort of make party political points, is to try and really basically ask the questions you'd like asked. I mean, what would you actually want me to ask? If you were up there this afternoon at 3:30, what would you ask him?
Yeah, he's asking people to go back to work. Is everything going to be deep cleaned? Where is the strategy of people's health being put in place? Like he said Monday, now he's saying Wednesday. Is that going to give enough time for companies to put all this in place, 2 metre distance?
And Kelly, it's Nick here. Do you mind my asking, what is it you do, or do you have a loved one who's going to a workplace and you're worried about him or her? What specifically exercises you?
Yeah, I mean, my son is my key element. He is a chef.
Right.
But, not only that, I mean, I have 3 children.
Yes.
The school strategy at the moment is being put on hold, I understand that. But even when they are required to go back, I have a lung condition. Right. How does that affect me with my children going back to school?
And you're in one of the vulnerable 1.4 million, are you?
I am, yeah.
OK, back to Sir Keir Starmer.
And Kelly, I mean, you touch on another issue which, again, is unresolved, which is if you can't work at home and therefore you're being encouraged to go back to work, but you've got children and the schools aren't open yet, you're in a pickle, because you're being told on the one hand you really need to start going back to work, and your company might say, well, it's about time we started up again, but the schools aren't open for your children because you're not a key worker as was defined before this weekend. And it's very easy to criticise, I do get that, and this would be difficult for any government, I completely get that, but I do think that some of these questions are a bit obvious, and some of them could have been answered in a better way last night. We'll see how the Prime Minister gets on this afternoon, but Kelly, I'll certainly take up some of those themes with the Prime Minister this afternoon on your behalf, and I hope you'll be able to maybe listen or hear it when we get to it about 3:30, I think it'll be.
We'll pick up on that, Kelly. You look after yourself and of course those children. Thank you for getting us started. Second up, Peter in Weymouth. Peter, you're through to Sir Keir Starmer. Good morning, Peter.
Morning, Nick. Morning, Sir Keir.
Hello, sir.
Hi, Peter.
Hiya. I listened to the Prime Minister's speech last night, and I have to say I personally thought it was a speech of a leader. And also, at the risk of playing the devil's advocate, Sir Keir, I think you would have made an equally eloquent speech. But given the short time he had to give his speech in, within, I forget, was it 7 minutes or 10 minutes or something?
A little over 10.
Something like that.
A little over 10. Go ahead, Peter, to your question, sir.
I don't... Obviously, he's going to be giving us more detail today, but I really don't know what else he could have said within that time. My question is, Sir Keir, what would you have said differently within that time frame? What would you have given to us as a nation?
Yeah, Peter, look, that's a fair challenge because 10 minutes is a very, very short period of time. I think my criticism is that what I'd have liked is the government to have got the sort of ducks in a row before he did the speech. So, just to give a different example of the one we were just discussing, the Prime Minister said in his speech that if you fly in from another country, you'll be required to go into quarantine for 14 days or so. Now, that may be perfectly sensible, but what he didn't say anything about was what happens if you arrive by boat. And so immediately you've got these problems. So Peter, of course, it's very difficult to get everything into 10 minutes. I get that. But the challenge I put up for the Prime Minister 10 days ago was really, I said, why don't you seek consensus before you make your announcement? In other words, get everybody on the same page, and then actually you're in a stronger position. And I don't feel he's done that. So, Scotland is saying we're not going to adopt the stay alert message. We're going to keep with stay home. Same with Wales. So instead of one message across the whole United Kingdom, you now got different messages in different places. I just don't think that can be a good thing. So it's not so much could he have said, I don't think more than 10 minutes was really doable last night, but it's have you got all your ducks in a row before you make your speech? And I just felt that he hadn't, and that's why it's unravelling this morning. Now, more detail will come and we'll ask questions, we'll get answers, because in the end what matters more than whether we're scratching our head this morning is people want clarity. They want to know as the week rolls out, what can I actually do? Because it says you can drive to different places now. The question that wasn't answered last night is to do what?
Yes. Well, I asked Dominic Raab. I asked Dominic Raab. So grandparents can drive to see their grandchildren, but they still can't touch them. They still can't actually see them. They just wave through a window. It is. And to your point, I wonder. And this came from an earlier caller, Sir Keir. Boris Johnson, did he say something yesterday because he sort of felt he had to? Should it have been like a budget, in that you all do your work in the House of Commons and you have your biff and bat and ding-dong and everything, and then there is an address that night by the Prime Minister at 8 o'clock saying, this is what we're going to do? Is there an argument he should have done it that way, Sir Keir?
I think he should have done, and I think again, I try to measure myself because I do know it's easy to criticise, but by choosing 6 o'clock on a Sunday night to come up with a message which is 7 o'clock, sorry, yeah, but to come up with a message that basically go back to work tomorrow morning, that is a major ask on a Sunday evening. That really needed a plan, and I can't help feeling the Prime Minister got in his head he was going to do something on Sunday, and having said he'd do something on Sunday, felt he had to stick to it. Whereas he might have been better saying, I will make an announcement as soon as my ducks are in a row. It might be Monday in Parliament, but if I'm not ready, it might be Wednesday. But I don't need to tell you the date, because what you need to know is I'll be ready before I say it. Right. I think he may have tripped himself up by pinning himself to Sunday, and then saying what he said. And I was quite surprised if I'd been listening at 7 o'clock and I couldn't work from home, being told effectively, you better get ready for work tomorrow morning on a Sunday evening.
Yes.
That's quite something.
It is. Let's go to another call. Peter, thank you for yours. Steve in Surrey, you're through to Sir Keir. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi. I'm a special constable trying to enforce, obviously, the lockdown. And as the former head of the Crown Prosecution Service, do you think the police should have been given stronger powers from the start to enforce the lockdown? Because obviously at the moment it's, we go into an open space, we give out a warning, then we give out a fixed penalty notice for like 30 quid, and if we see them again, we arrest them, and it doesn't feel like it's having the sort of effect that we want.
Let's bring Sir Keir in. Steve, stay on the line. Keir Starmer.
Steve, look, thanks for what you do as a special constable. I think that, and I think, by the way, I think the police have been doing a really good job across the country in quite difficult circumstances these last few weeks. And the way that they've cajoled and encouraged and got most people to do what they need them to do has been really good to see. I think the problem, as I see it, it's not so much the powers as the clarity. I know from when I was Director of Public Prosecutions working with all the police forces across the country that what police officers need, if they're to do their job to the best of their ability, is some clarity. What can be done, what can't be done, so that everybody knows where the line is. And I fear, you saw a bit of it this weekend, that because the Prime Minister had said, I'm going to make a statement, it probably means lifting lockdown. Lots of people thought, well, I might as well get out there then this weekend. And I think it was Hackney Police were saying it's almost impossible now to hold this. And I fear going forward it's going to be even more difficult now for the police. I mean, just to take the example we were discussing, if you can, you're now being told you can drive somewhere, but it's not entirely clear what you can do when you get there. How on earth do you police that? Because
and be a policeman on the borders, Sir Keir. Imagine being a policeman on the borders between, say, England and Scotland or England and Wales.
And also, Steve, you'll know this as a police officer. If you stop someone and they say, look, I genuinely don't know, I thought I was allowed to drive to do this, you'll have to use your own discretion, but that puts you in a difficult position, really. And that's why clarity here, I think, would help the police massively, and obviously help. I think the vast majority of people do want to abide by the rules, actually. I really do.
Let's bring Steve in. Do you agree? But from your interactions very well, what I'm sitting here as a journalist and with respect to Sir Keir as a politician, you're out there on the front line. Are most people trying to work with you and your colleagues?
I think, yes. Obviously, at the start, people sort of didn't quite understand the gravity of the situation, and then, so there's still quite a lot of people congregating in parks. So you'd go. So at 1 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, you'd go to a park, you disperse 4 groups of people, you get on with the rest of the shift. You go back past that park at 4 o'clock, and the same afternoon, more people have sort of gone.
Yes.
More
Steve, was it worse this weekend? It felt like there were a lot more people out.
In the open spaces, no, I didn't see as many people in the parks. However, I'm seeing a lot more cars on the road.
Yes.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
It's almost as if we've kind of gone back to what it was like pre-lockdown. The traffic still. It's kind of gone back to normal. People
Well, on that point, Sir Keir, do you think the fines are sufficient? Should they be enforced more? Should they be increased? Should we actually be becoming, I'd hate to use the word aggressive, but slightly more aggressive or style of policing, tactics of policing?
I don't think the level of the fine is going to make a difference. It's the ability of the police to get on and enforce it. So, in other words, I think if people are going to break the rules, I don't think they're necessarily taking much notice of the fine. They're just hoping they're not going to get caught. But the best thing is for the clarity and the police, the clarity for people, clarity for the police, so that everybody knows the rules and we can deal with those that aren't abiding by the rules. Because the vast majority are abiding by the rules. And, they get irritated when they think people aren't and nothing is happening.
Good luck to you and your colleagues on the front line, Steve. Thanks for your input. Dave in Manchester, you're through to Sir Keir. Go ahead, Dave. Good morning, sir.
Hello. Good morning.
Hi,
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Sir Keir. I wouldn't want your job to start off with.
He's only had it a month. Give him a break.
Thanks, Dave.
But I've got to admit, I am enjoying PMQs a bit more at the moment. You seem to be saying that you're agreeing with the unions at the moment, as left in the RMT. I'm a train driver. My health and safety reps and management for the company I work for are doing a really good job at the moment on protecting us, and that's great. But since then, where am I going? the rail unions seem to be saying not to work in unsafe and overcrowded trains. And speaking to my colleagues this morning already, that they are getting overcrowded.
Really?
What should I do?
Really?
Yeah.
Goodness me.
Yeah.
And this is in and out of Manchester, is it, Dave? Just to clarify.
Correct.
OK, so they're very busy trains in Manchester. Sir Keir?
Dave, I mean, I don't know what it's like in Manchester. You've just described it. I have been hearing reports about the tubes being busy this morning. And I think this is part of the problem because, in a sense, the government's still saying, if you can work at home, stay at home. So that's the safest thing to do. If you can't stay at home, go to work. The big risks, if you go to work, are, firstly, how do you get there? Can you travel safely? Secondly, you're going to be safe when you get there. And that's why I'd have liked to have seen more work done on the transport side before the announcement was made, because we're now getting into the territory of people saying, well, what happens if I go to work and it's not safe? I was asked this question about a week ago, I think, in the media, and I said that's the very situation we want to avoid. That's why we need the plan in place before we start, because we don't want people in that position where they're trying to have to make those sorts of decisions. And I think that's avoidable. It's why I was encouraging the Prime Minister when I spoke to him a couple of times last week to make sure that the government was talking to the trade unions and to businesses to get everybody onto the same page.
Would you support, if a union was to say, we're going to urge our members not to go to work, we have concerns over the lack of health and safety kit or whatever it might be, would you support that union line?
Well, we'd have to look at it, but I do think everybody's entitled to a safe place of work. And you mentioned safety kit. That was one of the things I raised with the Prime Minister last week, because there will be workplaces where the 2-metre rule is difficult to enforce and therefore protective equipment is going to be needed. The guidelines the government put out in consultation last Sunday had a heading, protective equipment at work, what's the guidance? And it just had, in, I think, square brackets, to be added or to be inserted. There was nothing there. So that's an example of where I think we've got to a situation of, encouraging people to go back to work, but not having put in place the necessary framework for them to do it.
Dave,
And we've got to sort this.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's all very well arguing about it. We've got to identify the problem, challenge the government on it, and get it sorted, because people are going to go back to work this week and they want to be safe.
Dave, when are you next on shift, lastly, my friend?
Wednesday morning.
And sorry, sir? Did you give me the time, did you?
5:19.
Oh, right, okay. Are you planning, you'll be there, or you'll wait for advice, or what are you planning to do, lastly, Dave?
Oh, I'm going to be there.
You'll be there.
I've been there every day, and I'll continue being there. It's just what's going to happen.
I know. Well, that's very much what Sir Keir has addressed. Again, I would suggest listen to what he and his colleagues have to say this afternoon in Parliament, see what comes out of that. Dave, look after yourself. Thank you. Peter in Oxford. Peter, I think you're on the NHS front line and you're through to Sir Keir. Go ahead. Good morning.
Hello, good morning, Nick. Good morning, Sir Keir. Yes, I'm an NHS GP. I'm especially concerned about what's going to happen this winter, because we're going to have potentially a mixture of coronavirus and flu epidemics and so on. But we're facing the possibility of the transition period for Brexit ending on the 1st of January. Unless one of two things happens, either there's a deal or an extension. And at the moment, the negotiations are going nowhere, as you know. And the likely prospect is a double blow to the economy and to the NHS in particular. I think it's going to be catastrophic for people like me who are trying to access drugs from European countries, etc.
Yeah, Peter.
My concern is,
Can I move you to a question, Peter? I'm terribly sorry, sir. So many people want to talk to Sir Keir. Could I possibly move you towards the direction of your question, please?
So basically,
Thank you very much.
Keir, you said when you became leader of the opposition that you would speak for an extension if the need arose. And my question is that now the case, knowing what we now know?
Okay, stay on the line, Peter. Sir Keir Starmer.
Peter, the government says it's going to get the negotiations and the deal done by the end of the year. I've always thought that's tight and pretty unlikely, but we're going to hold them to that and see how they get on. But they say they're going to do it. But the first point you made, I did want to skip that because it's a really important one, which is nearly every year there's a flu epidemic. And we have immunisation against that and vaccine against that. We need to get a plan for that sorted out, because I can see the problem, and you will know this better than me. The symptoms of ordinary flu, which we have in the winter, we didn't have so much this year, will be very similar to coronavirus. And therefore, a plan needs to be put in place now to make sure that what we pick up in November, December is either the flu or COVID-19, and distinguishing between the two and getting a vaccine in place. It's one of the things I wrote to the Prime Minister about last weekend, because I can see a real problem coming down the track.
As regards Brexit, Sir Keir, were you in, and I remember, and obviously you and I spoke a lot about the whole premise of Brexit, but we are where we are, would you seek to press pause now, were you Prime Minister?
Well, I would seek to ensure that the negotiations were completed as quickly as possible. I've not called for a pause because the government says it's going to get done by the end of the year.
Well, you're riding both horses there, with respect. You're saying you don't think it's practical, but then you wouldn't press pause. You're falling between both your mixed message here, surely.
Yeah, I don't think it's practical, but we're a long way from December, so we'll see how we get on. But the government has said it can do it within the 12 months, so let's see.
All right. Staying with Peter, good luck for the work you do on the NHS. Maybe I can ask a question. Sir Keir Starmer, would you be prepared to go to work on a COVID ward with reused PPE? Sir Keir, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. That's a very, very good and difficult question.
That's why I sit where I sit.
I don't think anybody should be put in that situation. And I know people are being put in that situation, and they shouldn't be. I think that in the NHS, in our care sector, what we see is people with such an incredible sense of public service that they have worked in conditions which, frankly, they shouldn't have been asked to work in. I don't know.
You don't know whether you'd accept reuse.
Well, look, the position for people on the front line is very, very difficult because they're caught between needing the equipment they need and wanting to save lives, which is what they're doing. There's an incredible sense of public service. I don't think anybody should be put in that position. That's why we've been pushing the government on protective equipment.
Let's go to other calls. Lloyd in Beckenham. Lloyd, you're on the radio. What are you going to ask Sir Keir Starmer?
Yeah, hello, Sir Keir. I'll be very brief. Ian Henderson devoted his time to help out and give food parcels out, and the aftermath of what's happened to him I find really disgraceful, and I'm a Labour supporter. And as a small analogy, and I'll leave you to answer, our house is burning. This country is. We've got a certain flame with this pandemic. I don't mind who assists me in putting it out, and I think this should have been a discussion after we've sorted out this, and I think he deserves an apology.
And just to remind my listeners, you refer to a councillor in Kensington and Chelsea, Ian Henderson, who has been threatened with losing the Labour whip as he was filmed helping deliver food parcels with a Conservative, I think it was MP, yes it is the Conservative MP, the local area MP, something which in fact I raised with you, Sir Keir, I think it was last week, it's all a bit of a blur.
Nick, you did raise it, you raised it with me, I can't remember which day, and I didn't know, I think the first you raised it, and that's the first I heard of it, and I said I'd go and find out. I did go and find out. There were apparently some complaints, Lloyd, against Ian for what he was doing from some Labour members, but in no action was taken by the Labour Party or the leader of the council there against him, and quite rightly so. So it's blown over. It was a non-issue, and frankly, it would be better if it had never blown up in the first place.
So you don't support any of the problems? I mean, this is helping people who need food, for God's sake. It doesn't really matter, does it, your political strife?
I think we should all pull together, and across the country, that's what everybody's been doing. It doesn't matter what your political party, what your background. If you're prepared to muck in and help, volunteer, and get food to those that need it, that's a very good thing.
Lloyd, thank you for that. Let's go to some of the text, tweets and emails for your questions. Gloria in Kent. Does Sir Keir Starmer, I'm sure, think enough has been done for the over 70s, and how does he interpret the advice from last night? Sir Keir.
Well, the over 70s is that's a position of real anxiety, and I say that as my wife's father is 91, and like every family, she is very, very worried about him, as you can imagine. I know that everybody is. And there wasn't very much said about the over 70s last night in the speech at all, and therefore the working assumption is that the same rules apply, i.e. that if you're over 70, you should be shielding and staying at home. That is really difficult. I'm not saying it's not necessary, but it's really, really difficult, and I think families across the country are struggling with not being able to see elder relatives who are equally struggling, particularly if they're living on their own. I think that's the theme certainly coming through from me, as elderly relatives living on their own are. It's a very, very big ask, this. But I don't think that guidance has changed, and I don't want to suggest it has, because although I've criticised the clarity of the government's advice, I would say to people, follow the government advice, particularly on things like shielding, because in the end, saving lives and protecting the NHS really, still a key priority.
Rachel in Bexley, what would Sir Keir's advice be about the wearing of masks in public or on public transport?
Well, I think we're going to get something today on this, if I've understood it properly. And I think what we're going to hear is that in situations where you can't socially distance, so you can't keep your 2 metres, and you're in public, you should be wearing a mask. I think that's what's coming down the track, but it's very important people listen to what the actual advice from the government is, but I think that's what it's going to be.
Were you surprised there was no mention of masks last night by the Prime Minister, Sir Keir?
I was. Obviously, a previous caller was saying, well, there's only 10 minutes, you can't say everything. So we will look at the detail today. And in fairness, I think there may be detail coming on masks today. So that may be in the 50-page document we're all expecting. So let's see what it says.
And lastly, before we go back to the calls, Joy in Barrow, what sort of reckoning needs to be done in our relationships with China when this is all over? Does Keir Starmer think that they were economical with the truth about the reality?
Well, we're going to have a reckoning with so many things after this, including how we value people in this country. I think turning this into a sort of war on China isn't going to help. We do need to make what I would have liked is a global response from the start. So what I was concerned about was every country sort of going its own way with whether it went into lockdown, whether it stopped flights coming in, that every country sort of went for its own version. We can see now with the vaccine, same problem, different countries trying to develop the vaccine. I'd like to see them all working together. And we've seen it with protective equipment, where different countries have raced to get protective equipment across the world in competition with each other. I actually think that this is a time when we pull together globally and try to make sure that all countries, so far as possible, are operating to the same rules.
Got to ask you this, how helpful are the actions and words of President Trump in pulling together globally, Sir Keir?
Not very. Not very. And you'll see how his words have changed. But it is, I can't help feeling that what this terrible crisis has lacked is a world leader of real stature who's been able to say there needs to be a global response. As I say, each country going into this separately didn't work. And on a vaccine, for heaven's sake, let's pull together. It doesn't matter where in the world this is developed, as long as it is developed fast. And then we have a plan for rolling it out that doesn't put every country into competition with every other country, because therein lies chaos. But there is not, in my view, that world leader out there just at the moment.
Has he done anything right, Trump?
Well, he's done. There's some things that he's done right, but he's the way that he changes his mind, changes his view. Initially denying this was really anything of a problem, then saying America's got it absolutely right. People see what he does and they'll form their own view, but I don't think in President Trump, we see the man capable of pulling the world together with a global response.
Callum is in Streatham. Your question to Sir Keir. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm a Labour member and I'm a renter. And Labour moving to a position where, instead of rent suspensions or rent deferrals, means that if I was to lose my job and not be able to pay my rent for months, I would end up in debt to my landlord. I'm just wondering why I should remain a Labour member and campaign for you when you're putting the income of my landlord above my own.
Yeah, Callum, thanks for raising this, because this has been an issue a number of people have raised. If all rents are suspended, full stop, then the government will have to pay to compensate landlords. There's no question about that. And therefore, public money will be paid to landlords to compensate for the fact they haven't got rent, even where people don't lose their jobs. So what we've said, the better option is, if somebody does lose their job, which is tragic, and I certainly hope you don't, then the benefit system should be paying the rent at a better rate. So in other words, if you carry on and you're still in your job and you can pay your rent, then there's no reason for the government to pay the landlord. If unfortunately you lose your job and the state can then step in with benefits to pay the rent, because I don't want anybody to put in the position you've described, but at the moment to simply say all rent is suspended and that means there's no income to landlords for 2 years or whatever it may be, it is inevitable, we've looked at this before, that the state will then have to compensate all landlords. So then we'll be paying out to landlords, in some cases for people who've kept their jobs and could have paid their rent.
Quick response from you, Callum. Sorry, just to confirm you, Keir. Quick response, Callum.
You're saying that instead of the state being responsible for my loss of income through no fault of my own, I should be responsible for that. Because
no, not Callum.
No, I don't think you quite heard Sir Keir. No, he's saying if you stay in employment, why should the state pay your rent? If you're out of employment, if you lose your job, which he hopes you don't. Callum, yes?
If I lose my job and my landlord is now out of my rent payments, why can't the landlord apply for state benefit? Why is it me that, and I am, your policy means that I'd be in debt and I'd have 2 years to pay this off. I mean,
Callum.
No, I don't think that's what I
Callum.
heard.
I really don't want you to be put in that position, Callum. If you lose your job, I think the rent should be paid, but that could then be paid as part of the benefit, so that we would be paying the state, if you like, the public, we're paying the rent for those that were in the unfortunate position of losing their job, and I hope they don't. Not a blanket payment for everybody not paying their rent, whether they're in a job or not in a job.
OK, I understand. That comes to an end. I wonder, as a final question for this first episode of Call Keir, and to try and lift the mood a little bit, knowing you are a football fan, you're probably aware that, regrettably, a third Brighton player has now tested positive for COVID-19. Is it time to close the Premier League where we find it, Arsenal fan Sir Keir Starmer, and leave your team languishing in ninth out of any chance of getting into Europe? Sir Keir Starmer?
That's such an unfair thing to suggest, because obviously if any more games would rise gloriously up the
I don't know that table. You would, but do go on.
I don't think we could just close it as it is, but it looks a long way before we can open it. But you remind me, seems like years ago, that we were in ninth place and not having the best season. I'm sure next season will be better. I think that every season, though.
Yeah, but good for the spirit of the nation if we get some sport going, though, on a serious point.
I think it would be. Yeah, it would be, if we can, and we can do it safely.
Thanks for taking part in Call Keir. Best of luck to you and your family, indeed your in-laws as well, who, of course, are battling the position of being in that vulnerable group. Sir Keir Starmer appearing here on LBC, where it's 9:32, and the news is next.
The Labour leader has told us the nation has not been given clarity over the new coronavirus lockdown guidelines. Boris Johnson announced last night what he called a first sketch of a roadmap to reopen society, as well as some changes coming into force in England this week. But Sir Keir Starmer says the address was confusing.
The suggestion was last night that people go back to work today if they can't work at home, but don't use public transport. Now, it's really difficult, particularly in a city like London, and without guidelines in place as to how workplaces need to operate. Simple things. How do you keep people 2 metres apart? What about sanitation, protective equipment?
The Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, has told us measures have been agreed